My name is Evelyn Harper. If I could whisper just one thing to the girl I used to be at 9, it would be this. You were never invisible. You were inconvenient. Savannah got birthday cakes with sparklers. I got silent dinners and a locked bedroom door. I used to think I was born broken. Then my father shattered my hand with a hammer, and I realized they were the broken ones. I didn't vanish. I watched. I listened. I planned. And when the time came, I came back not with a scream, but with a smile. Because this is how the forgotten rewrite their story. The first memory I have of feeling small wasn't when I was picked last for dodgeball or when a teacher forgot my name. It was at the dinner table. Savannah sat with her elbows propped like royalty, her plate a canvas of roasted chicken, garlic butter mashed potatoes, and buttered corn still steaming. She was laughing at something our mother had said, some tired joke recycled from Sunday brunch. Meanwhile, my plate was a piece of dry toast and half a banana with a blackened edge. I remember thinking maybe they ran out of food, maybe the groceries didn't stretch far that week. But that night became a pattern, and the pattern became permanent. Savannah always had more food, more praise, more softness in how they looked at her. Her room had fairy lights, throw pillows, and a vanity covered in lip gloss and glitter pens. Mine had a twin mattress without a frame, shoved into the corner of the attic, close enough to hear the rats, but too far for warmth. The walls were bare, except for a calendar I stole from the public library, taped up with bandages. I used to write my name on each date, just so I existed somewhere. They never hit me when I was younger, but their silence was a bruise I carried daily. It wasn't loud, it was small things. My birthday forgotten, a school recital skipped. Savannah got a puppy for her 12th. I got a lecture about responsibility when I asked for socks that matched. She was the golden child, the miracle baby they weren't supposed to have. I was the leftover, the one that just sort of happened after. One Thursday night when I was 12, I came home late from the library. I loved the smell of old pages and the quiet corners where no one demanded anything from me. My stomach groaned as I opened the front door, the scent of garlic and seared meat wrapping around me like a cruel joke. In the dining room, Savannah was already seated, her phone propped against a glass of lemon water, recording her latest Family Vibes TikTok. She was cutting into a steak so tender it bent under her knife. On her plate were grilled asparagus, a baked potato split and buttered, and a small salad of arugula and strawberries. I paused for a second, taking it in like someone watching a feast from outside a restaurant window, my mouth filled with saliva. I walked into the kitchen, hopeful. My plate was already waiting on the counter. A white paper napkin, one slice of plain bread, and a single slice of bologna curled at the edge like it had been sitting out for hours. No drink. No sides, no explanation. I didn't say anything at first. I just stood there, looking at the absurd imbalance, like maybe I could make sense of it if I stared long enough. Savannah's laughter floated in from the other room, high-pitched and artificial. I picked up the plate, sat at the edge of the kitchen stool, and chewed slowly. The bread stuck to the roof of my mouth. The bologna was sour. That was the night something inside me shifted, not exploded, just fractured. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, but the quiet inside me took a different shape. It became dense, solid, heavy enough to plant roots. They didn't see it. They never saw me, not really. The knife never left Savannah's hand, but her eyes flicked toward me, half curious, half bored. "Aren't you going to say thank you for the sandwich?" she smirked. Her fork tapped the edge of her glass. A signal or a rhythm? I couldn't tell. I stared down at my half-eaten slice of bologna and swallowed hard. Something broke loose in me. Maybe it was hunger. Maybe it was the years of quiet erosion. I stood up slowly, walked back into the dining room, and looked directly at my father. Why does she get steak and I get this? My voice didn't shake. It was flat, almost quiet, but it sliced through the air like shattered porcelain. He didn't look up right away. He kept cutting his meat, bite, chew, sip of water. Then he placed his utensils down, deliberate and slow, like a performer about to take the stage. "What did you say?" he asked, voice low and calm. I said, "It's not fair. Why does Savannah get steak and I get cold bread?" Savannah chuckled, not even pausing her video. "Maybe because I don't look like a drowned rat." She tossed her hair and popped a piece of asparagus into her mouth. I barely heard her. My eyes were locked on my father. He stood up, not fast, not dramatic, just purposeful. Each step toward me felt like the room itself was shrinking. He didn't yell, he didn't curse, he just walked to the kitchen drawer, the one that stuck a little when you pulled it, and yanked it open. Out came the old hammer, rusty, heavy, familiar. I didn't move. He took my left hand and pressed it onto the counter. His grip wasn't violent, it was precise, like he was assembling furniture or repairing a clock. I opened my mouth to scream, to plead, to do something, but my mother's eyes caught mine first. And there it was, the twist. In her eyes, for just a split second, was fear, real fear. A flicker, not for me, but for what she knew was about to happen. Her mouth parted like she might say something, her fingers twitched, then she looked away, turned toward her wine glass, lifted it, and took a long, deliberate sip. And then the hammer came down. Crack. I didn't even process the pain at first. Just sound, metal against bone, then the fire, blinding, screaming but not out loud. I didn't hear my voice, only the echo inside my skull. Crack. My fingers twisted in ways fingers shouldn't. I dropped to my knees. My father let go like he was finished with a chore. He wiped his hands on a dish rag and walked back to his seat. "Ask that again. I dare you." I curled around my hand, breath ragged, nausea rising. Savannah snapped a selfie with her plate. My mother dabbed the corner of her mouth with a napkin. No hospital, no bandage, no apology. They dragged me by the arm to the basement and locked the door. The air was cold and mouldy. I curled into a ball, fingers throbbing and bent, wrapped in an old t-shirt that smelled of bleach and forgotten summers. The pain pulsed like a second heartbeat. I whispered nonsense to myself, anything to stay conscious, not out of fear, out of fury. That night I didn't cry. I made a promise. They would regret ever giving me scraps. The basement was more than a room. It was a grave. The cement floor was cracked and cold, with damp creeping up the corners like mildew fingers. The only light came from a naked bulb swinging above me, casting warped shadows that twitched with every movement. I lay there for hours, maybe days. It was hard to tell. Time bent down there, stretched, snapped, disappeared. At first, I cried. Not loud, just soft, wet sobs that soaked the collar of my shirt. My fingers throbbed in rhythm with my heartbeat, swollen and discoloured. The pain was a living thing. It spoke to me in pulses. But eventually, even pain gets tired. And when the tears ran dry, something else took their place. Stillness. It started in my chest, spread to my limbs, and wrapped itself around my mind like armour. I stopped begging in my head. Stopped wishing for someone to come down those stairs and say, "Sorry, it was a mistake." That version of Evelyn, the one who waited for rescue, she died in that room. In her place, someone else began to form. I taught myself how to go silent, how to make my breath shallow so I wouldn't smell the mildew, how to blink without moving my neck so I wouldn't scare the rats, how to stop flinching when I heard footsteps above, because flinching was hope, and hope was poison. I built a ritual. Each day I pressed my back against the wall and recited birthdays, my own, then Savannah's, then fake ones I made up for imaginary siblings who'd never lived in that house. I did it to mark time, to keep track of my existence. On the third day, I think it was the third, I started whispering stories to myself, ones where I was loved, where my name wasn't a sigh or a slap. Then came the flashbacks. They didn't ask permission. I was 6, feverish, vomiting into a bucket in the hallway. I'd called for Mum, voice weak and cracking. She passed me carrying groceries, stepped over me like I was a stain on the carpet. "Don't be dramatic," she said. "You're just not as strong as Savannah." I was 8, standing outside during Savannah's birthday party, balloons everywhere, a bouncy castle, a magician. I had asked for a small cake the month before for mine, just one candle. Instead, I got a note on the fridge. We'll celebrate next year. Be patient. Next year never came. I was 10, sitting in the nurse's office with a sprained wrist. No one picked me up. I walked home with my arm in a sling made of notebook paper and scotch tape. My father grounded me for causing drama at school. Each memory etched itself into my ribs, into my skin. I wasn't just forgotten. I was erased, one neglect at a time. And yet, in that basement, something unshakable began to grow. A new kind of breathing. A rhythm that wasn't survival, but strategy. I realized I was still here. Still breathing, still watching. That meant I could wait. I could learn. I could outlast them. I didn't need to be saved. I needed to become someone worth fearing. On what I assumed was the 5th day, after the pain dulled to a simmer and my stomach stopped growling from sheer exhaustion, I decided to move. Not out of desperation, but curiosity. The corner near the old furnace had always been blocked off by stacked boxes. No one ever bothered with them, not even during hurricane warnings or when Savannah needed more storage for her makeup bins. I crawled over, one arm cradling my mangled hand, and began shifting the boxes with the other. Dust exploded from every surface, coating my face, sticking to my tears like ash. Most boxes held junk, old yearbooks, broken decorations, mouldy tablecloths. But then, tucked beneath a pile of warped magazines, I found a wooden crate sealed with masking tape. Across the top, in faded Sharpie, were the words, "Property of Camille." I froze. Camille? The name rang no bells. I replayed every family dinner, every photo on the wall, every story ever told. No Camille. Ever. I pulled the tape slowly, like I was unwrapping a bomb. Inside were photo albums, a diary, and a handful of birthday cards. I opened one at random, pink with glitter and the words, "To our shining star, Camille, love, Mum and Dad." My blood went cold. Page after page showed a girl about 16, with dark curls and an awkward smile. She stood in front of the same fireplace we had in the living room. One photo showed her holding a baby. Me. I was the baby. I stared at that picture for a long time, as if the longer I looked, the more answers would appear. But they didn't. Only questions grew. Why had no one ever mentioned her? Why were her things sealed and hidden? Why was her name erased? I opened the diary. The entries were normal at first, school stress, crushes, complaints about Savannah being spoiled. But then, about 2/3 in, the tone shifted. One passage read, "I told Mum I didn't want to watch Savannah alone anymore. She got angry, said if I didn't step up, she'd find someone who would. Dad didn't even look at me, just muttered something about obedience." The last entry was dated 4 months before my 5th birthday. It simply said, "If something happens to me, tell the truth. Even if no one listens, especially if no one listens." I sat in the dark, heart pounding, the diary trembling in my lap. Camille had existed. She had lived in this house, held me as a baby, and then vanished, scrubbed from memory like a stain. No photos, no name, not even a whisper. A sick feeling crawled up my throat. I hadn't been the first. Camille had been the first ghost, and I was next. The realization didn't shatter me. It steeled me. If they could erase one daughter, they could erase another, unless that daughter wrote herself into history so deeply they couldn't dig her out. I tucked the photos and diary back into the box, resealed it with a strip of duct tape from a broken toolbox nearby, and shoved it under a loose floorboard I pried open with my heel. I wasn't ready yet. But one day, I'd bring Camille back. And when I did, the house that buried her would remember both of us. Once I was out of the basement, once the bruises faded just enough to hide beneath sleeves, I began my quiet investigation. I didn't ask questions aloud. I didn't search anything on the home computer. I knew better. My parents were the kind who believed curiosity was rebellion, so I started small, with the school. I told the front office that I was doing a legacy project on former students. The secretary, a kind older woman named Ms. Delaney, smiled like I'd just made her day. She led me to a locked cabinet with dusty binders labelled by year. I scanned spines until I found class of 1999. Camille's last year, if the diary had been accurate. There she was. Third row, far left, Camille Harper. Same curls, same smile I'd memorised from the hidden photos. She wore a faded denim jacket and a black choker. Underneath her caption, President, Literary Club, Choir Soloist, Yearbook Editor. She wasn't invisible. She was everywhere. The more I looked, the more I found. She was in club photos, newspaper clippings, honour roll lists. She had won an award for a short story titled The Echo Room. An eerie tale about a girl who screamed in an empty house, only to discover the echoes were her own future. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry, but then the trail went cold. Nothing after spring semester, no mention of graduation, no senior trip, no best memories section. It was like she'd been erased mid-sentence. I asked Miss Delaney if Camille had graduated. She tilted her head, confused. Camille Harper? She repeated, flipping through the pages with furrowed brows. That's odd. I don't remember her walking. Maybe she transferred. I smiled politely and thanked her, but inside my stomach twisted. Camille hadn't transferred. Camille had vanished, and the school didn't even notice. On the way home, I walked instead of taking the bus. I needed the space. The sky was grey, heavy with unshed rain. I clutched my jacket tighter and reviewed everything I knew. Camille existed. She was loved, at least by someone. She disappeared at 17. And no one talked about her, not even once. That night, I crept back into the basement and retrieved the crate. I studied every photo again, this time looking past the smiles. One stood out. Camille was sitting on the porch swing, eyes red, smile forced. Behind her stood our father, hand on her shoulder. His grip looked too tight, his smile looked too wide. It hit me then, not like a bolt, but like a slow, cold tide. Camille hadn't just disappeared. She'd been erased, intentionally. My hands trembled as I held her diary again. So many entries filled with frustration, defiance, exhaustion. I saw myself in her words, like a reflection I didn't know existed. But she never got to finish her story. Maybe I still could. The fear inside me wasn't gone. If anything, it had matured. It no longer screamed or begged. It simply waited, calculated, grew sharper. Because now I knew the truth. I wasn't their first sacrifice. And I wouldn't be their last unless I ended the pattern. It wasn't until I found the envelope that the final thread unravelled. Hidden beneath a false bottom in the crate, it was yellowed with age and sealed with a brittle strip of tape. My name wasn't on it. Hers was, Camille. But what was inside was never meant for her. It was a letter, written by my mother. The ink was faded, rushed, and full of scratches, but the intent was clear. I know who she is. Don't think I don't. I found the pictures, the emails, the old Valentine's card you kept in your drawer. Camille is yours. She has your mouth, your temper, and your lies. If you won't fix this, I will. The words hit me like a punch. Camille wasn't just another daughter. She was the first betrayal. My father had a child with someone else. And my mother, the woman who taught me silence, had discovered it. Camille hadn't vanished because of school or mental health or poor choices. She'd been removed, scrubbed from memory like a glitch in a family photo. I sat on the cold basement floor, the letter trembling in my hands, and felt the world shift under me. My family had buried a secret child. Now they were slowly burying another, me. And suddenly everything made sense. The disdain, the neglect, the rage simmering beneath the surface every time I asked a question or took up space. I was never meant to become my own person. I was meant to fade, like Camille. But I wouldn't, not this time. The next morning I didn't go home straight after school. I walked 3 blocks past the post office to the small animal rescue shelter I'd seen flyers for at the library. I told them I wanted to volunteer, scoop litter, walk dogs, anything. They didn't ask questions, just handed me a clipboard and told me to show up on Saturdays. That's where I met Martha Quinn. She ran the shelter like a drill sergeant, sharp eyes, tighter bun, voice like gravel and honey. At first, she barely spoke to me beyond basic instructions, but after a few weeks she started watching, noticing. One afternoon, I dropped a metal dish and winced as my fingers failed to grip it properly. Martha was beside me in a second, crouching low like she was inspecting a wounded animal. "What happened to your hand?" she asked quietly. I tried to lie, said I fell, said I jammed it in a door, but the way her eyes narrowed told me she already knew. "You don't have to tell me," she said, standing slowly. "But if you ever want to leave, there are ways." She handed me a manila folder before I left that day. Inside were pamphlets about legal emancipation, transitional housing, scholarships for at-risk youth, even a card for a therapist. I didn't say anything, not then, but something shifted. For the first time, someone had seen me. Not as broken, not as dramatic, not as disposable, just real. And that was the beginning. The start of something my family couldn't erase. The radio station didn't look like much from the outside, just a squat brick building tucked behind the high school football field. But inside, it buzzed with quiet potential. Microphones hanging like vines, sliders and knobs glowing under soft lights, and shelves filled with tapes labelled in smeared Sharpie. It smelled like coffee, plastic and possibility. Martha had called in a favour. "She's good with wires," she'd told the station manager, a wiry man with headphones permanently around his neck. I didn't know much yet, but I was willing to learn. And more than that, I needed to. I showed up every Saturday morning and stayed late into the afternoon. They started me with cables and connectors, rewinding cassettes, and cataloguing audio logs. By the second month, I was sitting behind the board adjusting faders and testing mics. I learned how to edit waveforms, scrub background noise, and mark timestamps. What they didn't know was I was also taking notes for something else entirely. At home, everything continued like nothing had changed. Savannah posted TikToks about family dinners I was never part of. My father still slammed doors when I was too quiet, and my mother still moved through the house like every room owed her respect. But I moved differently now. I listened, and I planned. The first recording device I set up was crude. A salvaged mic pack from the station, a power bank, and a repurposed memory card from the theatre department. I hid it beneath the old recliner in the living room. It ran on a timer, activated every night between 7 and 10 p.m. when conversations flowed most freely. Gossip, frustration, complaints, everything poured into the air like poison, and now I was bottling it. But I wasn't just collecting gossip, I was also chasing Camille's shadow. One afternoon, while filing old tapes at the station, I asked the manager if there were any archives of local broadcasts from 15 years ago. He looked surprised but shrugged. "Try the back room, might be some tapes from the county news briefs." I found them buried in a dusty crate, unmarked except for dates. I scanned labels until one caught my eye. Harper Family Disturbance, 2001. I held my breath as I slid it into the player. It wasn't long. Just a 30-second mention from a local anchor reporting that a domestic matter involving a teenage girl had been dismissed due to lack of corroborating evidence. No names, no follow-up, but I knew. Camille had tried to tell someone. She'd filed a report, and someone had made sure it disappeared. That night, I pulled Camille's diary from beneath the floorboard again and cross-referenced dates. The entry that mentioned talking to a counsellor about her home situation lined up exactly with the tape's timestamp. The twist wasn't that Camille had cried for help. The twist was that someone had silenced her. And I had a strong suspicion who that someone was. Back at school theatre, I asked to help clean the prop room. No one ever turned down free labour. I rummaged through old lighting rigs and soundboards until I found a half-broken shotgun mic. It took 3 weeks of spare parts, some soldering burns, and a crash course in circuitry, but I made it work. By mid-November, I had a fully functional, high-gain, directional recorder hidden behind a ceiling vent in our dining room. It captured everything, and I listened to every word, because this time no one would rewrite my story. I was already recording it. I hadn't expected to find the name in the recordings. I thought my family would stay vague like always. Coded cruelty, careful insults, threats laced in smiles. But one night, in the middle of a conversation about school board elections, my mother said it. "Councilman Reeves still owes me," she muttered, swirling wine in her glass. "If he wants his wife to stay unaware of those texts, he'll keep that file closed, just like last time." There was a pause. Then my father chuckled. "Camille's counsellor was a joke anyway. Whole thing would have blown over if she didn't mouth off." I stopped the playback, rewound, played it again. This time, I didn't just hear the words. I saw the whole picture. Camille hadn't simply been ignored. Her cries had reached the surface, a counsellor, a report, a file, and my mother, my stone-faced, polite, smiling mother, had made it all vanish, not out of fear, out of strategy. She'd used leverage, blackmail, political debt. I felt cold, not scared, not surprised, just cold. My family wasn't just broken, they were dangerous, the kind of dangerous that wears pearls to church and sips iced tea while orchestrating erasure, the kind that smiles in yearbook photos while deciding who gets to matter. And now I was recording every second. I began labeling files with timestamps, quotes, and tags, not just for me, but for later, for evidence, for truth. And then the idea came, not like a flash, more like a slow build. A whisper growing louder in my head, a podcast. But not about me, not only. About Camille, the first daughter forgotten, the warning that no one heard. The proof that I was not alone, not delusional, not ungrateful, just next in line. I spent hours scripting in the back room of the station. I recorded voiceovers during lunch breaks, overlaying them with soft ambient music and grainy echoes pulled from old cassette static. My voice sounded different when I listened back, lower, steadier, like someone I might believe. Each episode would be short, focused, titled with dates and moments, the sandwich, the hammer, the name Camille. They weren't stories, they were evidence, case files dressed as memories. And I wouldn't say our last name, I wouldn't name the town, but I'd name the truth, because truth has a tone. It vibrates, it stirs something that lies cannot bury. The first episode began with the sound of breath, just a quiet inhale, like bracing for something awful. Then my voice. My name isn't important. What matters is what was done to me, and before me, to her. I didn't know yet how many people would hear it. I didn't care. What mattered was that someone, somewhere, would know Camille had existed, and now, so did I. The auditorium was packed with families clutching camcorders, flowers, and laminated programs. Flashbulbs flickered like fireflies. Names echoed from the stage, each followed by applause, cheers, sometimes even air horns. Everyone was someone's pride. I sat in the fourth row from the back, hands clenched in my lap, wearing a dress I bought at Goodwill, and altered myself. My fingers still didn't bend properly from the break years before, but I'd taught them how to sew, how to hold, how to create something that fit, even if I never did. "Savannah Harper," the announcer called. The crowd erupted. She stood on stage, glowing, golden sash around her shoulders, clutching a framed certificate like it was a crown. "Excellence in leadership and community spirit," the voice said, as if irony wasn't audible. I waited. One more name. Maybe they'd call mine. Maybe, despite everything, someone had noticed. They hadn't. They didn't. My name was never spoken. No handshake, no photo, no seat on the stage. I was a shadow again, sitting in a row of plastic chairs meant for guests, not ghosts. When it ended, people flooded the aisles with balloons and roses. I slipped through them like smoke, quiet and unseen. Outside, the sun was blinding. I walked toward the edge of the parking lot and stopped behind a row of bushes. That's when I heard him. My father's voice, sharp, cold, close. She thinks she's special now? That girl should have been thrown out with the trash years ago. I pressed the record button on my phone without thinking. The audio captured every syllable. My name wasn't in it, but the venom was enough. She's nothing, you know that, barely human. Laughter followed, my mother's, dry and distant. Savannah chimed in, talking about some influencer deal she just signed. I told them we're a strong family, all about values. My phone kept recording as I backed away. I didn't cry, not then. The moment I hit stop, I knew this was it. I walked home, slow and steady like a soldier retreating from a battlefield only to return at dawn. The house looked the same, white siding, blue shutters, front door with chipped paint like a mouth always half open. Inside, the air was thick with dinner prep. Something roasted in the oven. Savannah's shoes were kicked off by the door, pristine white sneakers with gold trim. I stepped over them. In my room, still the attic, still the mattress, still the cracked ceiling, I packed a small duffel, 3 shirts, 2 notebooks, a flash drive, a hidden copy of Camille's diary. The rest could burn. I wrote a note and taped it to the fridge downstairs. You broke me, but not forever. Keep the toast. I've got a bigger table now. Then I waited, just until midnight, because some exits deserve moonlight. I didn't go far. 3 blocks from the house, I ducked behind the boarded-up community rec centre and waited. The duffel was just a prop. Inside was nothing but shredded newspaper and a plastic hairbrush. I sat on the steps under a flickering street lamp and pulled out my real weapon, the manila envelope. 3 of them, actually, each labelled in clean black marker. 1. School Board. 2. First Baptist Elder Council. 3. Meadow Ridge PTA. Inside each were select audio clips. Nothing too long, just enough. My mother joking about skimming bake sale funds. My father bragging about scaring a co-worker so badly he peed his pants. Savannah mocking a disabled classmate and then rehearsing a heartfelt apology for her followers. And of course the crown jewel. That girl should have been thrown out with the trash years ago. She's nothing, barely human. I'd printed out transcripts, highlighted key quotes, even attached anonymised summaries of what each clip contained. No accusations, no dramatics, just facts. I mailed them the next morning from a neighbouring town, wearing sunglasses and a hoodie, my hair tucked up in a borrowed cap. No one looked twice. But that wasn't the end. That same afternoon, I booked a single hour at a small recording studio near the train tracks, the kind that usually hosted garage bands and voiceover artists. I paid in cash, told them I was doing a student project. They didn't care. I brought my own flash drive, my own script, and I read it all in one take. Podcast intro music, soft static, fading into a slow piano note. My voice. They told me I was dramatic, that I was wrong, that I was nothing. I believed them until I found the photos, until I heard the old recordings, until I read Camille's diary. Pause. Breath. My name isn't important. What matters is what was done to me, and before me, to her. Soft swell in background music. She was 17 when she disappeared. They said she transferred, but the file was erased. Her name was erased. I wasn't supposed to find her, but I did. Short beat. And I won't let her be forgotten again. The episode was only 7 minutes long. No names, no town. No direct accusations, just truth wrapped in memory. I uploaded it under the podcast name The Second Ghost. And I ended with one line, one truth sharp enough to echo. Ghosts don't haunt, they remember. That night I slept behind the shelter in a back corner Martha had prepared, just in case. A folded cot, a small lamp, an emergency key. She didn't ask questions when I arrived, just handed me a warm drink and said, whatever happens next, you've already survived more than most. In the silence of that room, I listened to my own voice on playback, not trembling, not angry, just real. And in the space between syllables, I knew this was only the beginning. The first wave hit on a Monday. A headline appeared in the local paper. PTA President under review for misuse of student funds. My mother's name was printed in bold type, followed by a blurry photo from last year's holiday fundraiser. According to the article, anonymous documentation had been delivered. Transcripts, recordings, copies of financial logs. She didn't go to her job that week. She stayed in the living room in silence, the television flickering between morning shows and static. I wasn't there to see it, but a neighbour told Martha. She looked like a statue, the woman had said, still, cold, like something cracked. By Wednesday, the church board had convened an emergency vote. My father didn't get to defend himself. The elders had received their own envelope. Inside was a USB drive with recordings and a note. Sometimes it's not what's said in church, it's what's said after. By Thursday, he was removed from the deacon role, his name scratched off the bulletin. No ceremony, no warning. Savannah's downfall came loudest. She posted a sponsored video on TikTok, a bubbly clip about forgiveness, family, and choosing grace. Comments flooded in within minutes. You mocked disabled kids? Didn't your mum steal from school kids? Your dad said his daughter was barely human? She tried to deny it, then to spin it, then to disappear. But brands don't like scandals, not from Golden Girls selling authenticity. Within 48 hours, 3 sponsors pulled their deals. One public relations firm posted a statement saying they were deeply disappointed by the values recently uncovered. The house began to rot from the inside. At first, they thought it was external. Haters, my father barked. Jealous people online. A smear campaign, my mother whispered, wringing her hands. Someone out to ruin us. But the paranoia grew louder than the denial. I heard, through mutual classmates, that Savannah accused our mother of planting fake stories. My mother yelled that my father should have controlled Savannah's social media. He barked that she'd been too busy embezzling cookies to notice their daughter spiralling. They didn't speak in full sentences anymore. Only accusations. One-word grenades thrown over dinner plates. Traitor, liar, saboteur. Meanwhile, I said nothing. I walked through the neighbourhood like a ghost dressed in human skin. I watched the crumble from the sidelines. No one suspected me. How could they? I hadn't been important enough to remember. My erasure was my shield, my invisibility, my superpower. I still listened to the podcast daily, not for vanity, but for grounding, for the reminder that what I'd done mattered, that someone, somewhere, heard it and understood. By the end of the week, Martha told me the shelter's inbox had 57 emails. All about the podcast, she said, handing me a printout, some asking how to help, some sharing their own stories. One was from a girl in Ohio, another from a grandmother in Utah. They all ended the same. Thank you for telling the truth. I thought I was the only one. And that, more than anything, confirmed it. Their legacy was collapsing. But a new one had just begun. It started with a message in the shelter's inbox. The subject line read, Podcast Inquiry, Possible Collaboration. Martha opened it while sipping her tea, squinting at the screen like it had just whispered a secret. Evelyn, she called, someone from LA is asking for you. I took the laptop and read. The sender was a woman named Rachel Monroe, a documentary filmmaker known for her series on unsolved injustices and forgotten voices. She'd stumbled on The Second Ghost after someone clipped a line from my episode and shared it on a forum about systemic abuse. She'd listened, all 7 minutes, and now she wanted to talk. I think your story deserves more than audio, her email said. I think it deserves light. She mentioned Netflix, funding, a limited docuseries, 3 episodes, full creative control. They would keep names confidential, animate the visuals, protect my identity. We believe survivors should own their narrative, she wrote, but we also believe silence protects abusers. You could help thousands. I stared at the screen for a long time, and then I closed the laptop, because I knew what she didn't. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about reclamation. I didn't want to be watched. I wanted to be free. Fame was just another room with no door. The next morning I replied with one line, "Thank you, but this story is already finished." Martha didn't ask questions, just nodded. She understood. Sometimes justice doesn't need an audience. Sometimes it just needs to land. I moved into the shelter full-time a week later, not as a client, but as a mentor. Martha had already started making space for me, a real bed, a lamp with a yellow shade, a tiny bookshelf I filled with things Camille would have read, poetry, zines, books with dog-eared pages and scribbled margins. The house was always a little noisy, girls laughing down the hallway, someone burning toast, music leaking from earbuds, but it was warm, not just in temperature, but in presence. There was Marissa, who slept with a baseball bat under her bed, Lily, who drew flowers in every margin, and Joy, who never spoke above a whisper but could repair any piece of tech with her eyes closed. They didn't ask me what happened. They didn't have to. We all carried the same silence, just in different shapes. One night while folding laundry, Marissa looked at me and said, "You sound like someone who burned a bridge and built a castle from the ashes." I smiled. "No," I said. "I built a front porch and left the light on for the next girl." That week, I recorded one final episode, not for the public, just for us, for Camille, for every name that never made it into yearbooks or news stories. I didn't upload it. I printed the transcript and hung it inside my closet, taped next to a photo of the house I'd once escaped from. The last line read, "Some legacies crumble, others bloom from beneath them." And that was enough. The listing popped up on a Monday afternoon. 4-bedroom, 1.5 bath. Fixer-upper with history and character. The address was like a punch to the stomach. My childhood home, white siding, blue shutters, still standing like it hadn't held ghosts for decades. I clicked through the photos. The living room looked smaller than I remembered. The staircase still creaked in the second photo. The kitchen, once a battlefield, now had a crack running down the tile like a scar. The price was lower than I expected. Foreclosure, the ad said. Owner must sell quickly. Martha stood behind me as I stared at the screen. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" she asked. I nodded slowly, not out of vengeance, out of purpose. We called her cousin, a grant coordinator who ran a program for transitional home ownership, people who had survived the worst and were ready to build something new. Within 3 days, I had paperwork. Within a week, I had keys. I stood on the front lawn, clipboard in hand, hoodie zipped tight. Savannah was there, frantically yelling into her phone. My father paced by the porch, face red, a cardboard box under one arm. My mother sat on the steps, staring at the ground like it had swallowed her name. They looked up as I approached, saw me, recognized me, but couldn't understand. I didn't say a word, just stepped past them, key in hand. The door creaked open, and for the first time I stepped into the house, not as a prisoner, but as its owner. I didn't redecorate right away. I sat on the living room floor, breathing in old dust and forgotten shame. The room still remembered me, and I remembered them. That night, I unpacked one thing only, a wooden plaque carved with 2 words, "Still Standing." I placed it on the mantel. Then I opened the box from under my bed at the shelter, the one I hadn't touched since winter. Inside, Camille's diary, the old family photos, the last printed podcast transcript. I held the photo of her on the porch, the one where she looked cornered, not posed. And that's when I noticed something. The tattoo. Faint. Just under her sleeve, a single star. I'd seen it before. Months ago, at the shelter, during a donation event in the next town over. A volunteer coordinator named Callie had worn short sleeves. Same curls, same nervous smile, same tattoo. I didn't say anything then, but now I was certain. Camille wasn't gone. She'd just changed her name, her life, her ending. The twist wasn't that she'd vanished, it was that she'd survived. The dining room had been empty for years. Once a stage for silence, rage, and uneven meals, it now sat under soft lighting and freshly painted walls. I'd stripped the wallpaper, replaced the rotting floorboards, bought a table, not a plastic one from the thrift store, but a real oak table. Heavy, solid, mine. 6 chairs circled it, 5 filled. Marissa brought brownies. Joy arranged wildflowers in a cracked mason jar. Lily played soft music from a Bluetooth speaker, humming along as she set the napkins. And then the doorbell rang. I opened it slowly. Camille stood there, older, sharper, but unmistakable. Her curls were shorter now, streaked with grey at the temples. Her eyes held stories she hadn't told. She wore jeans, a plain sweater, and a hesitant smile. "Callie," she said softly, offering the name she'd lived under for the past 20 years. "Camille," I replied gently. She didn't flinch, just stepped inside. She took in the hallway, the frame where her photo used to hang, the crack above the stairwell. Her fingers brushed the banister like she was checking if it was real. I led her to the dining room. The others smiled politely, unsure of her place in our strange little constellation. But she didn't sit right away. She walked to the far wall, stared at the spot where the family portrait used to hang, and whispered, "It's smaller than I remember." "They usually are," I said. She turned to me. "Why invite me?" I lifted the silver dome from the centre of the table. 2 plates, 2 steaks, one for her, one for me. She stared for a long moment, then laughed. A quiet, broken sound, like something cracking open. "You remembered I hated chicken," she said. "Some things are worth remembering." We ate slowly. No one rushed. The conversation danced gently between books, music, stupid things pets do. No one asked Camille to explain where she'd been. No one asked me what came next. We just ate. And when the plates were cleared and the brownies passed around, I stood up. "This table," I said, tapping the oak, "used to be a place of silence, of unevenness, but not tonight." The others looked up, forks paused mid-air. "I don't care who built the house before me. I don't care who sat here and thought power came from who got fed first." Camille's eyes shimmered. "I built this table," I said, "with splinters, with memory, with scars." I looked around. "Some tables you inherit, others you build yourself. This one I built with scars." And for the first time in my life, I felt full, not just fed, but full.